Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us. This is Politics with Roger. This is our Political Science 101 video series. This is our freshman class, our political science class, and the purpose of this class is for you to gain maximum understanding in advanced political science concepts in the shortest amount of time possible. So again, welcome back. This is video number 5. This class will be about information, a very vast and big subject. I mean, quite frankly, they all are. But I'll have to admit, this one was a little bit hard to prepare for. I'll get to that in a second. Before diving in, I just wanted to pose a question to all of you to think about till the end of the class, and we'll discuss it a little bit more. But in 2017, the question is, are we more informed than we have been in the past? Are people more informed today than they've ever been in the history of the world? I want you to ponder that question, and we'll just dive right in. Just a couple of reminders, this being the 5th class in our Political Science 101 video series. The first 4 classes are very important to building your foundation for understanding in political science. Just a reminder, our first class was about power, influence, and authority. Our second class was about politics from the right, which also helped explain the paradigm between the right and the left in politics. Our third class was about politics from the perspective of the left. And our last video was about communication. And there is some overlap in this class with communication. So that's where that brings us to information today. And after this particular class, if you've consumed all 5 of these videos, it should give you a pretty good foundation to which to start filtering the information that you receive in politics, no matter where it's from. You can start be able to see things differently and with a lot more understanding just from these 5 classes. So diving right in, information. Again, very difficult to prepare for. I think there is some irony here. This class, when we talk about information, and really when I bring up any concept or any idea in this video series, it's always in the political context. So if you hear a different definition someplace else, I reserve the right to let you know that, hey, I'm speaking in a political context. So you might, there might be some variation of definitions that you get, but I'm always looking at these concepts in terms through a political filter. So, just FYI. This class, when we talk about information, is really about the process that data becomes information or knowledge. At this point, you can think of information being synonymous with knowledge because, we have raw data, and let me just say raw data defined as factual information such as measurement or statistics used as a basis for reasoning, discussion, or calculation. Basically, there's a process where we take data and then we turn that data into knowledge or information. Now, data can be considered information, but from this point on, when I say information, we're really talking about knowledge, how we come to what we know. And this is very important. Not only how do we come to what we know, but how do people who are sharing information or knowledge with us, how did they come to the conclusions that they came to? So we're going to break that down and that process down, and it'll give you a different understanding of all the information and knowledge that you'll consume moving forward because information and knowledge is very subjective, particularly in political science. This is what makes it a science. We hypothesize, we test, and we constantly get new information or new situations that changes the paradigm of the information that we have. That's what makes political science a science and not an exact. Not exact, not like mathematics or chemistry where exact measurements will create the same results every time. Political science is not like that. That makes it fun and it makes it irritating at the same time. But anyway, it really challenges your critical thinking, and that's why we love it. The definition of information, just a couple definitions for information. Information, knowledge derived from study, experience, or instruction, knowledge of specific events or situations that has been gathered or received by communication, intelligence, or news. So, diving right in, again in this political context, information being synonymous with knowledge, and this lesson being about the process of how we take data and create information or knowledge from it. Now, there's quite a bit of overlap with the communication class that we just had in lesson number 4. A lot of it starting with bias. And bias, bias is one of those words. You can't get away from it. Everybody has biases, including yours truly. And that's, again, also what makes this particular subject of information and knowledge so infinite as far as possibilities. And we assume that everyone's looking for the truth, or maybe we don't. I mean, there's some bias right there. That's really, well, anyway, we'll just start right there. And this is what the overlap with communication. And when you're receiving information or knowledge, we have to ask ourselves, is this true? Is it accurate? And since truth and accuracy are oftentimes, particularly in political science, subjective, people could always argue with you that, no, this is not true. We can come up with ridiculous examples, but you could tell someone the sky's blue, and their response might be, well, it's light blue. Just as a kind of an annoying example, is the information true? Is the knowledge true? And what is true? That's that makes it again difficult in the art of persuasion. Is it prepared in good faith or with bias? And like I just got done telling you, information will always have bias. So what is good faith information? Well, good faith information in this context is people simply trying to, at least making an attempt to come to the truth, which again will always have some bias in it. But if people are really sincerely trying to get to the truth, we consider that good faith. So anyway, is it deceptive? Is it misinformation? Something that I've been saying in my weekly newscast, and something that I think I should definitely say here is there's so much misinformation that I don't think we've been living in the age of information. Historians have been saying, and political scientists have said, we are living in the age of information, where there's an unprecedented amount of media and information being delivered to people, and people have access to more information than they've ever had before in the history of the world. That is all true, but they also have more access to misinformation. And I would suggest that politically, we have been living in an age of misinformation, an age of cognitive dissonance, an age of suspended disbelief because of the power of this mass media and the manipulation of the knowledge and information that we have. If you're curious, I'd say this era started when John F. Kennedy was assassinated in 1963, and we're just now starting to break out of it. And the reason we're starting to break out of it is because of the rise of what we would say independent media outlets challenging a very few centralized media outlets that were given a lot of authority to distribute information. The mass media distributing information to the masses were seen as the final stop, or were seen as the ultimate authority on a lot of almost all things political for a long time in the United States. And because these mass media outlets with a lot of authority have basically destroyed their own credibility, we're now seeing a power vacuum, and we're seeing it being filled by independent media outlets. And by independent media outlets, I mean, we're talking about everyone in the world with a blog, or shooting a video, or disseminating information and knowledge to others. And collectively, as a blogosphere, as a social media platform, the information that people are getting from independent media outlets is now becoming more credible and usurping the power and the authority that old mass media had. So we're living in a very interesting era just as far as information is concerned by itself, without getting into all the other politics of it. The age of misinformation, I pray, is coming to an end, and hopefully we will enter into a true Renaissance period, a true age of information, where there's not so much deception, cognitive dissonance, and suspended disbelief. Or what I should say is there will always be people distributing misinformation but hopefully the masses, the people that consume it, won't be so easily persuaded by lies, persuaded by misinformation. So now we'll just get into some concepts. Let me back up a step here. Separating information and communication. Again, in the political context, I describe communication as a present function, something that is happening in the present. I'm having communication with you even though we're talking about the subject of information. Information itself, research and development, and also presentation of it is typically, just to separate it from communication, a function of the past or the future. In other words, it's being recorded, it's being prepared for future presentation, or it's not even being communicated. Sometimes it's just being archived. But I wanted to create some line in the sand where people could say this is communication, this is information. So think of communication as a present function. Think of information as a past or future function. So getting into some of these key concepts, discussing information, I want to talk first about media and the speed of information. People don't think about the speed of information, let's take a, but I can illustrate the speed of information. It's just taking a big picture view. Think about how information moves in 2017. How you can post something on Facebook or Twitter. Just type a little message, click your mouse or your phone, and instantly your message is accessible to millions of people, literally all around the world. Someone from Los Angeles, California, can disseminate information to somebody in Japan at the click of a button. By contrast, think about, hopefully you learned about the Pony Express when you were in school. This was literally men on horses taking written notes from point A to point B to disseminate the information. Or going back even further, in ancient times, people would just have to run. There's no other way to spread information. It's just person to person. So the speed of information is very relevant because the more information is passed back and forth, the more knowledge and information is gained. That's an important concept because the more data is debated and discussed and communicated, again, the more knowledge is gained. So the speed of information is a very important concept, and to really crystallize this, I would talk about let's talk about the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Our government in 1963 told us that it was a single actor, Lee Harvey Oswald, that assassinated the president, and the public, I guess, believed that, or they accepted it. It wasn't challenged to the point where the authorities and mass media were forced to change that narrative. But especially within recent years, even before the release of a lot of CIA documents, that actually just happened a couple months ago. It's December 2017, and just a few months ago they released a lot of CIA documents about John F. Kennedy. But before even that information dump, you saw a lot of people, you kind of saw a revival of people talking about what they call the Kennedy conspiracy. I call it the truth, but the truth about the Kennedy assassination. And because this information was discussed so widely with so many people around the world, including sources in the know, because that speed and coverage, it's all relevant when talking about the speed of information. People were really starting to figure out that we were totally lied to in 1963, just based on the evidence, the raw data that was there. It wasn't adding up with the conclusions or the knowledge that was presented. And we can. I don't want to make this about Kennedy, but there's just details, like, for example, where Lee Harvey Oswald, his location in the book depository, the number of shots he got off, the way Kennedy's head slouched or moved when he was hit by bullets. And the more people talked about it, the more people realized this isn't adding up. The knowledge that we have, based on the data that we have, it's not adding up. It's like saying 2 + 2 = 5. So people didn't know exactly what happened, but they knew that the information and knowledge that they were given based on the data that was available was false. So the speed of information, that made a huge, huge difference. Um, and again, just when you consider TV, radio, internet, um, all technological advances that dramatically sped up the speed of information. Even in World War II, even with the existence of the radio, because it was not widespread or it didn't have the reach that radio might have today. There were Japanese and American troops fighting in World War II after the official end of World War II, simply because they had no idea the war had ended. Imagine that. Especially, it's hard to imagine in 2017 because information seems to travel instantly, as does misinformation, just to throw that in. But in World War II, that wasn't the case with the radio. And the other thing about the outlets, the TV and the radio, those were mediums, mass mediums, that were easily controlled by very few authority figures in those areas. So just something to think about, mass media and the speed of information. Just coming back to the era of misinformation for a second, if you ever read the books, and we talked about this on the last lesson in communication, but again, read 1984, read Brave New World, read Animal Farm, which talks about totalitarianism and tyranny and how information was manipulated and used, weaponized to control the masses. So even in the modern context in 2017, warfare today, asymmetric warfare, has much more to do with information than it does with a conquering army. We're used to seeing, like the war movies, a giant army marching across a field in infantry and tanks, or going back further, cavalry and infantry marching across a field and attacking another army that's sitting there waiting for them to be attacked. Warfare in 2017 is more about information warfare, asymmetric warfare, and I'm not going to go on a long jag about that, but it's absolutely, I don't want to say foolish, but if you discard information and really how serious a subject this is, then political science may not be for you, because we are living in a time where we literally say that we are in an information war. And I agree with that 100%. The evidence is around us every day, all day. Another key important concept, or three concepts I want to talk about: distraction, memory, and apathy, are the allies of misinformation. And what do I mean by that? Well, it's pretty simple. Starting with apathy, if you don't care about what's going on, then it's easier to lie to you, to misinform you with propaganda, or just, again, misinformation. And the same thing is true with memory. You see, and this seems to be a huge problem in the modern context, where people appear to have very short memories. And if you don't have a good memory when it comes to politics, then again, it's easier to mislead, misinform, and lie to people. Because we need to, when we're looking to find the truth, we need to remember the data and the knowledge that we have of the past. When that knowledge of the past is forgotten, when there is no knowledge base of the past, then you can simply lie and manipulate. You can lie and manipulate to anybody who doesn't have a strong basis of information from past experience. And actually, you see that as a political tactic. Mao's China, which murdered or killed over 80 million of their own people, the Maoist revolution, they focused on changing or propagandizing the young. And this is also in Marxism. You see oftentimes that the youth is targeted, because the youth don't have the perspective that the older generations have of the past. And it's easier to manipulate the young because of that, because they don't have that solid base of information. It's like it's like they had forgotten everything, but they were never taught. So it's a little different, but it's the same thing. And they don't have a base of knowledge, so they're the easiest group of people politically to manipulate. And you see political movements all the time trying to manipulate the young. And if you don't know about the Maoist Revolution, read about that, because that was all about manipulating the young generation and turning them against the older generation, and it worked, and it led to perhaps the bloodiest dictatorial regime the world has ever known. I mean, that's a loaded statement, and you can argue about that, but Mao is said to kill over 80 million of his own people in China, and he was loved for it, by the way. So, you know, and distraction again, and distraction is a great example, I think, for modern America in 2017. Distraction and apathy, and again, memory, they all go hand in hand, where, you know, you got people so distracted with mundane things that are unimportant, that they either become apathetic to serious information that they need, or they never hear about it because they're simply too distracted with other things. And that is a tactic in modern American context. It's a tactic to distract particularly the youth of this country with gadgets and irrelevant things, and then impose whatever political will people in power feel like they want to impose, simply because we have a distracted, apathetic population. So these are very important concepts in thinking about information. And by the way, we're gonna dive into more case studies. I have to get through this quick. This is just an overview class, and you know, I always try to keep it to 20-30 minutes, and you know, we'll go way beyond that, I'm sure. But we'll cover all these concepts in far more detail in the sophomore, junior, senior level classes. This just being the overview. So now we come to research and development of information. Again, converting data into knowledge. But this also has a lot to do with polling and research study, that kind of thing. First couple concepts I want to talk about is causation and correlation. Now, to define these words, causation is the act or process of causing, the act or agency that produces an act. For example, if I say, you know, I flip a light switch and the light comes on, that's causation. Because I flipped the light switch on, the light came on. That's a definite because A, we have B. That is what causation is. Now, correlation is different from that, and the definition here, a casual, complementary, parallel, or reciprocal relationship, especially a structural, functional, or qualitative correspondence between two comparable entities. Now, that's kind of a mouthful, and you know, I barely know what the heck that means when I read it. Correlation does not equal causation. You'll hear me say that quite a bit, and I'll give you a modern example. For the last 15 years, many in our political paradigm have been telling us that the increase of carbon emissions was causing global warming. And on the surface of things, people might say, well, that could be true because it looks like we're putting out more emissions, and every year we put out more emissions. According to the data that we're being presented with, the temperatures are getting higher. And people who are trying to advance a political agenda were telling us that was causation. That was the cause. 100% it's because of carbon emissions that we are suffering from global warming. Now, I would argue with people and say, well, what about the sun? What about the Earth's rotation around the sun? What about the tilt of the world? What about the methods that are being used to gather the data? These are all relevant things. And this is why, by the way, it's difficult to find the truth even when you're making a sincere effort to find the truth, because there's so much data on so many subjects. Taking raw data and turning it into actual knowledge, finding actual causation, it's hard. It's difficult to do, even when you're trying to do it. It's even harder when people are presenting misinformation and engaging in a deception intentionally. So, you know, so my response to a lot of the global warming alarmists, what I would call them, that might not be your term, is, hey, buddy, correlation does not equal causation. To which they would reply, what does that mean? And I would reply, well, carbon emissions, while it is one variable, it's only one variable in the equation here when we're talking about why temperatures are rising. Again, I listed just a few possibilities. I'm not saying that my possibilities or my theories were causation either. I was just trying to make the point that carbon emissions doesn't necessarily point to causation of global warming. Correlation does not equal causation, something to remember. And just to give you a second example, someone might say someone who uses drugs will always end up in prison. While you can definitely point to a correlation, yes, looks like a person who uses drugs is more likely to end up in prison. There is a correlation there. It's easy to point to the argument that it's not necessarily causation. There's other factors involved, which I won't get into now, but just another example of how correlation does not equal causation and vice versa. Statistics and polling, now we'll talk a little bit about, and push polling. Backing up to statistics, we have the same problems that we just discussed. The method of gathering the data, what is the process that changes raw stats into knowledge or information, and how do we derive that the conclusions that we're coming to are causation or correlations? And again, when we're talking about, I should have, we could come up with any number of things. Maybe education. Maybe we'll just say, oh, there's a correlation that our education improves the more money government spends. And if somebody wanted to prove that, how would they prove that? I don't agree with that statement, by the way, but it would be pretty easy for somebody to take a bunch of data and find correlation there. It would also be pretty easy for someone to take that same data and create a counter argument to it. So, we could be looking at the same statistics and still have a completely different argument. So I just wanted to point that out. Even if we're looking at the exact same raw data that cannot be challenged because maybe it's mathematical, maybe it's whatever, you can still come to a different conclusion in the process of coming to knowledge. So again, information, very, very vast, very, very infinite subject, because we're talking about knowledge here and how does one come to knowledge and truth. So we're just breaking that down for you. Talking a little bit now about polling and what we call push polling in the modern context. Now you see this a lot. Every time there's an election, you see mass media and independent media putting out polls saying this, Americans say this, Americans say that, Americans say that my guy is more popular than your guy, and this and that, and what is really true, because so often we see that these polls are inaccurate. And a great example was leading into 2016 that you could tell that the mass media, or you could tell it was an orchestrated effort, or I could tell, maybe others, apparently a lot of people couldn't tell, but because we had knowledge of this, of polling and push polling. Again, taking a poll and trying to find what the public is thinking about any given subject, trying to find the truth is hard enough, even when you're being sincere, even when you're implementing good methods. Why? Again, because what we talked about the word bias before. There's inherent biases in everything, from the person who's on the telephone doing the interview, from the person who's answering the phone and giving the answers. Everybody has biases that just they cannot separate themselves from, and that's just how the world is. So how do we get to truth? We haven't talked about this word yet, but a sample, and a sample just being a controlled group, where maybe a sample would include women in California under the age of 35. That's who we decided to call and ask this question. Or men from Nevada, over the age of 50 is who we called. That was our sample, and sample size makes a difference. Obviously, the more people who are sampled, the stronger correlation or the stronger conclusions you might be able to come to. But again, finding correlation and causation just from a sample, not easy to do. And a lot of times, political science will use these equations to say, this is how the country feels about something just based on a small sample. So, we'll get more into polling. Polling is going to be a very in-depth class that we'll have probably at the junior level. But polling and push polling, I would just say this. Anybody who wants to can create any result they want from a poll. That's what push polling is. And you can do that with something that we call implied questioning or suggestive questioning, which would be leading in like, a pollster might call you and say, hey, Donald Trump has no experience in government, and he's a terrible person. He's a terrible human being. Will you vote for Donald Trump? And the person on the other line of the phone could very easily be bullied out of it. Maybe the person was thinking about it, but they get a question like that and they don't know who's on the other line. They'll just go, oh no, I'm not going to vote for Donald Trump. Obviously, you're not getting the person's, in that example, you would not be getting the person's real opinion, their real view on the subject, because the question was a leading question, an implied question, a suggestive question that forced the person giving the data to manipulate their own opinion, their own answer. And you see this all the time in polling. I mean, whenever you are presented with a poll, the first thought that should come to your mind is who's the sample, what were the questions asked, and how many people were sampled, just for starters. And that'll get you a long way away. I mean, you'll see that towards the end of the election cycle in 2016, when we were getting close to Election Day, I mean, we were looking at sample sizes that were, for example, far more Democrats were being polled than Republicans. So quite obviously, you're getting answers that implied that Democrats, more people were voting for Hillary Clinton, the Democrat, than Donald Trump. Obviously, if you ask 200 Democrats and 100 Republicans the question, who you're voting for, and all the Democrats say they're voting for Hillary Clinton, all the Republicans say they're voting for Donald Trump, and then you present that as a poll that says 2 out of 3 people are interested in voting for Hillary Clinton and not Donald Trump based on our poll. Well, if the people don't understand sampling, if the people don't understand bias, they're going to look at that poll and they're not going to understand that it's complete manipulation of public opinion. And we live in an environment that this is rampant. I mean, this happens all the time, not just in politics, but in everything else. I mean, even you see even private businesses doing it. Shock poll: 100 out of 100 people love the product that I sell more than my competitors. And so just be aware of that. But polling and push polling, very prevalent in the modern environment. When we're talking about information and gathering data and turning it into knowledge, polling is one of the most popular ways to manipulate or actually come to a true political opinion. But it is a very, very difficult task, and it's very much an inexact science. And even when you're trying, it is trying your best not to have leading questions or not to have bias. It is difficult to come to a conclusion, to come to causation, to really understand what the public opinion is at any given time. If anybody had a perfect way to do it, they would already be very rich and famous, because that's what everybody's trying to do in the world of politics, is figuring out what people are thinking so they can maneuver and manipulate the public opinion. So anyway, that kind of brings us right back to where we started. Are we more informed in 2017? And my answer to that question is yes, we are more informed, but we're also far more misinformed. And that's what makes the modern environment so difficult. Now, on the same side, if a lie was believed back in the old days, or even back in ancient times, or even whenever, I mean, just throughout history, misinformation spreads faster. And is easier to believe in the modern context. So while I would say, yes, we are more informed, we are also more misinformed. So it's pretty hard to say if we're better off today than any time throughout history. So I challenge everybody interested in politics and interested in information. If you want to be involved in the modern political debate, you have to be very, very well informed because there are so many people out there who are misinformed. And then that doesn't exclude yours truly. I think everybody is misinformed at some time or another. And then there's others of us who are willfully misinformed. So it's a crazy environment, guys, and you know, and information. Again, I could go on and on and on, but we'll cover more of these concepts in far more detail in the upper level classes. This again just being the overview. Thank you for joining us for video number 5 in the Political Science 101 series with Politics with Roger, and we'll see you in our next class, video number 6, which talks about 1776. Thank you very much.